My name is Hector Morales. I am 46 years old, and I've worked as a border patrol agent in Arizona's Sonoran Desert for 22 years, patrolling some of the most remote and dangerous terrain along the U.S.-Mexico border. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you are watching from, please. I've spent over 2 decades tracking illegal crossings through desert wilderness that kills dozens of people every year through heat exposure, dehydration, and getting lost in terrain where temperatures regularly exceed 115 degrees Fahrenheit in summer. The Sonoran Desert stretches across southern Arizona and northern Mexico, containing millions of acres of saguaro cactus forests, rocky mountain ranges, and sand flats where a person can die within hours without water. This happened last July during a routine patrol in an area about 40 miles west of Tucson, near the Tejano Odom Nation Reservation boundary. I was working alone in my patrol vehicle, a 4-wheel drive SUV, equipped with everything needed for desert survival and rescue operations. The temperature that day was 118 degrees, typical for July in this region. Around 2 p.m., the hottest part of the day when most people seek shelter, I received a report of possible illegal crossing activity in a remote area, accessible only by rough dirt roads. I drove to the location, maybe 15 miles from the nearest paved highway, following tracks in the sandy soil that suggested a group had passed through recently. I found what I was looking for about a mile off the main dirt road, a rest area where a group had stopped, visible from the scattered water bottles, food wrappers, and fabric scraps they'd left behind. Based on the evidence, I estimated maybe 8 to 10 people, likely being guided by a coyote across the desert toward pickup points, north of the border. I was documenting the site with my camera when I noticed something unusual. Additional tracks leading away from the rest area, but not human footprints. These were large, barefoot impressions in the sand, easily 16 or 17 inches long, with clear toe marks. The stride length suggested something much taller than human, and the depth of the prints indicated significant weight. The tracks paralleled the human footprints, staying maybe 20 yards to the side, following the group's path for as far as I could see across the desert. I'd seen thousands of tracks in 22 years, human and animal, and these didn't match anything I knew. Too large for human, wrong shape for bear, which don't live in this desert. Not matching any known wildlife. I followed both sets of tracks on foot, the human prints and the strange barefoot impressions, for maybe half a mile. The pattern was clear. Whatever made the large tracks was following the group of people, pacing them through the desert, staying parallel but not approaching directly. Then I found something that made me radio for backup immediately. The human tracks stopped at a rocky outcrop, just stopped with no continuation visible. But the large barefoot tracks continued, circling the rocks, then leading away toward higher terrain. I searched the area thoroughly and found personal items scattered around the rocks, shoes, backpacks, water bottles, all abandoned, as if the group had dropped everything suddenly. I called for additional units and search and rescue. Over the next 6 hours, we combed the area with multiple agents and a helicopter. We found no sign of the group, no bodies, no additional tracks beyond where they'd stopped at the rocks. Nothing. 8 to 10 people had simply vanished in the middle of the Sonoran Desert in 118-degree heat. 3 days later, we found 2 members of the group, a man and woman, about 12 miles from where their tracks had ended. They were severely dehydrated and suffering from heat exposure, barely alive. After medical treatment and recovery, they were interviewed. Their story made no sense based on standard desert crossing patterns. They claimed something had been following their group through the desert, staying out of sight but making sounds that echoed across the empty landscape. They described seeing a figure in the distance, very tall, walking upright through terrain, where the heat made visibility shimmer and distort. They said their coyote guide had become increasingly nervous, eventually abandoning the group and running. The rest of the group had scattered in panic, running in different directions. The official report classified it as a typical case of desert crossing gone wrong, heat stress causing hallucinations, panic, group separation. The 2 survivors were processed through the system and deported. The other 6 people were never found, added to the list of hundreds who die or disappear in the Arizona desert every year. but I talked to other Border Patrol agents who work these remote desert areas. People I've known for years and trust completely. Several admitted privately they'd found similar situations. Tracks that didn't match known wildlife, evidence of groups scattering in panic in areas with no obvious threat, disappearances in terrain where bodies should be found. One agent with over 25 years in the desert told me about finding a site in 2016 where a group of 15 people appeared to have abandoned everything and run in all directions simultaneously. He found those same large barefoot tracks circling the area. Search operations recovered only 3 people from that group. The others were never found. The Tohono O'odham people, whose reservation covers a huge section of the Sonoran Desert along the border, and whose ancestors have lived in this desert for thousands of years, have traditional knowledge about desert beings they call by names in their language. According to their teachings, these beings inhabit the most remote sections of desert, particularly the mountain ranges and areas far from water, and they're territorial about humans crossing their lands. I continue working Border Patrol in Arizona because it is my profession and border security is important work. But I am more aware now of what might exist in the remote desert. When I find tracks that don't match known species, when evidence suggests a group scattered in inexplicable panic, I document it thoroughly and I don't dismiss it as heat-induced hallucination. The Sonoran Desert is vast and deadly, and based on what I've found and conversations with other agents, something else besides humans, and known wildlife moves through these remote areas. Something that doesn't want people crossing certain territories. The Arizona desert contains millions of acres of wilderness, much of it so remote and harsh that even experienced people die from the conditions. Perfect habitat for something that wants to remain unknown. And based on those tracks and the missing people and 22 years of experience in this desert, I know that extreme heat and lack of water aren't the only dangers people face when crossing the Sonoran Desert. My name is Preston Walsh. I am 51 years old, and I've worked as a backcountry ranger for Grand Canyon National Park for 19 years. Primarily patrolling the North Rim, which is far more remote and receives a fraction of the visitors compared to the South Rim. This happened last October during a multi-day patrol of the North Rim backcountry, specifically the area around Thunder River and Deer Creek, 2 of the most spectacular but difficult to reach locations in the entire Grand Canyon. The North Rim is dramatically different from the more famous South Rim. Higher elevation at 8,000 feet, dense forest, and trails that are challenging even for experienced hikers. I was 5 days into a 7-day patrol, covering maybe 60 miles of trails, checking on backcountry campers, maintaining trail conditions, and documenting wildlife. I was alone, carrying everything I needed in my backpack, camping at designated ranger sites along my route. On the evening of day 5, I was camped near Deer Creek Falls, a stunning 150-foot waterfall that drops into a narrow canyon. The area is incredibly remote, requiring a difficult 17-mile hike from the nearest trailhead, with significant elevation changes. I'd seen only 2 other people during my entire 5-day patrol, which was typical for October on the North Rim. Around 8 p.m., just after dark, I heard something that immediately got my attention. Rhythmic tapping sounds, like wood being struck deliberately, coming from the canyon walls above my position. 2 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. Continuing in that pattern, I listened carefully, trying to identify the source. The sounds echoed through the canyon in a way that made it difficult to pinpoint the exact location. The tapping continued for maybe 10 minutes, always in that same pattern, always from the canyon walls above. Then it stopped. Complete silence. The Grand Canyon at night is normally full of sound: wind, the creek, bats, small animals. But after the tapping stopped, I heard nothing. Unnatural silence that felt wrong. I used my headlamp to scan the area around my camp, but saw nothing unusual. I am an experienced ranger with 19 years in the backcountry, comfortable being alone in remote areas. but something about the silence after those deliberate tapping sounds made me uneasy. Around 10 p.m., I heard voices. Not normal conversation, but calls echoing through the canyon, coming from multiple directions. The sounds were strange, not quite human. Starting low and rising to higher pitches, they seemed to be answering each other, coming from different positions on the canyon walls, as if communicating. I grabbed my radio to call park dispatch, but I was deep in the canyon with no line of sight to repeaters. I got only static. I checked my satellite phone, standard backup for rangers. The battery was dead, even though I'd charged it that morning, and it had shown full power a few hours earlier. The vocalizations continued, always from multiple locations, always seeming to surround my position in the narrow canyon. I made a decision based on my training and 19 years of experience. I was leaving my camp and hiking out immediately, even though it meant navigating difficult trails in the dark. I packed my essential gear, left my tent and most of my equipment, and started hiking up the trail toward higher ground and hopefully better radio coverage. I used my headlamp sparingly, trying to preserve battery life while navigating the rocky trail. As I hiked, I heard sounds keeping pace with me on both sides of the trail, moving through terrain that should be nearly impossible to navigate in darkness. Rocks being disturbed, branches breaking, sounds of something large moving parallel to my position. This continued for maybe 2 miles of difficult hiking. Around midnight, I reached a ridgeline with clear sky visibility and tried my radio again. I got through to park dispatch and reported that I was cutting my patrol short due to a wildlife encounter and was hiking out. I didn't give details over the radio, just that I was okay and heading to the trailhead. The sounds followed me for another 3 miles, then stopped suddenly around 1 a.m. I continued hiking through the night, covering the remaining 12 miles to the trailhead by dawn. When I reached my patrol vehicle, I found scratches on the driver's side, deep gouges in the paint that hadn't been there when I'd parked 6 days earlier. I filed a detailed incident report with park management, describing the tapping sounds, the vocalizations being followed while hiking out. The official response was that I'd probably heard ravens or other wildlife that sounds strange in canyon acoustics, and that I'd made the right decision to hike out if I felt unsafe. The scratches on my vehicle were noted but not investigated further. But I talked to other North Rim rangers, people I've worked with for years. Several admitted privately they'd had experiences in remote canyon areas they couldn't explain. Sounds that don't match known wildlife, the sense of being watched or followed, equipment malfunctions in areas where everything should work. Most hadn't reported these experiences officially because they knew how it would sound. One ranger told me about an experience in 2019 in the Nankoweap area. He was on a solo patrol and heard wood tapping and vocalizations similar to what I described. He found large tracks on the trail the next morning, barefoot impressions that were far too big to be human. He photographed them but never filed an official report. The Havasupai and Paiute peoples, whose ancestral territories include areas now within Grand Canyon National Park, have traditional knowledge about canyon dwellers they describe by various names in their languages. According to their teachings, these beings live in the most remote sections of the canyon system, particularly in areas like Thunder River and Deer Creek, where few humans venture, and they don't want human presence in certain areas they consider sacred. I continue working as a ranger at Grand Canyon because I love this place and believe in protecting it, but I no longer do solo patrols in the most remote North Rim backcountry areas like Thunder River and Deer Creek. I only go to those areas with a partner now, and I trust my instincts completely. When wildlife goes silent in ways that feel wrong, when I hear sounds that don't match anything in my 19 years of experience, I leave that area immediately. The Grand Canyon is 277 miles long, up to 18 miles wide, and over a mile deep in places. The North Rim backcountry contains hundreds of square miles of terrain, so remote and rugged that most of it is rarely visited by humans. Perfect habitat for something that wants to avoid contact. And based on what I experienced and conversations with other rangers, something does live in the most remote sections of the canyon. Something that uses wood tapping and vocalizations to communicate. Something that followed me for miles through terrain I could barely navigate with a headlamp, and something that made it very clear I wasn't welcome in that area. My name is Emmett Bradford. I am 33 years old, and I am a professional long-distance backpacker and outdoor writer who specializes in hiking challenging trails and documenting the experience for outdoor magazines and websites. This happened last March during my attempt to hike the Arizona Trail, an 800-mile route from Mexico to Utah that crosses some of the most diverse and challenging terrain in the Southwest. I was about 300 miles into the trail, hiking through the Mazatzal Wilderness, a remote mountain range north of Phoenix known for rugged terrain and limited water sources. I'd been on the trail for 18 days, averaging about 17 miles per Dalton Y, carrying all my gear and food for multi-day sections between resupply points. The Mazatzal section was particularly challenging: steep climbs, limited water, and very few other hikers. I'd gone 3 days without seeing another person. On day 19, I was hiking a section that climbed from 4,000 to 7,000 feet elevation, moving from desert scrub into ponderosa pine forest. Around 3 p.m., I stopped for a break at a small spring marked on my map, one of the few reliable water sources in this section. While filtering water from the spring, I noticed something unusual. Tracks in the mud near the water, very large, barefoot impressions, at least 17 inches long, with clear toe marks showing 5 distinct toes. The tracks were fresh, made recently based on how crisp the edges were. I've hiked thousands of miles on trails across North America, seen all kinds of animal tracks, and these didn't match anything I knew. Too large for human, wrong proportions, not matching bear which don't live at this elevation in Arizona. The stride length suggested something very tall, possibly 8 feet based on the spacing. I photographed the tracks extensively with my phone, including measurements using my trekking pole for scale. Then, I noticed there were tracks on both sides of the spring, suggesting whatever made them had circled the water source, possibly drinking or just investigating. I continued hiking, but I felt uneasy in a way I hadn't experienced in over 5,000 miles of long-distance hiking. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no wind sounds, nothing. Just silence that felt oppressive. Around 5 p.m., with about 2 hours until sunset, I heard something behind me on the trail. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, keeping pace with my hiking speed. I stopped and turned around. The footsteps stopped. I couldn't see anything on the trail behind me, but I knew something was there. I started hiking again, faster this time. The footsteps resumed, matching my pace. I tried calling out, thinking maybe it was another hiker trying to pass. No response. The footsteps continued, staying maybe 100 yards behind me, just out of sight around trail bends. I made a decision to leave the official trail and take a cross-country route toward a forest road I knew was a few miles east. I didn't want to camp with something following me. I bushwhacked through forest and rough terrain, using my GPS to navigate toward the road. The sounds followed me off trail. Whatever it was tracking me through the forest, moving through terrain that was difficult for me, and should be difficult for anything large. I could hear it keeping pace, always staying just out of visual range, breaking branches and disturbing undergrowth as it moved. Around 7 p.m., just before dark, I reached the forest road. I saw a pickup truck approaching and flagged it down, something I'd never done in years of hiking. The driver was a local rancher who knew the area. I told him I needed a ride to the nearest town, that I'd had a wildlife encounter and was cutting my hike short. He agreed to drive me. As we drove away, I looked back at the forest edge where I'd emerged. I saw something standing at the tree line, very tall, dark-colored, watching the truck leave. I didn't mention it to the driver. I ended my Arizona Trail hike that day, after 300 miles of the 800-mile route. I've completed the Pacific Crest Trail, the Appalachian Trail, and numerous other long-distance routes. But I quit the Arizona Trail because of what followed me through the Mazatzal Wilderness. I talked to other long-distance hikers who've attempted the Arizona Trail, people I know from the hiking community. Several admitted they'd had strange experiences in the Mazatzal section. The sense of being followed, sounds that don't match known wildlife, that oppressive silence in areas where forest should be full of sound. One hiker showed me photos similar to mine, large tracks near water sources that he couldn't identify. The Apache people, whose ancestral territory includes the Mazatzal Mountains, have traditional knowledge about mountain beings they describe as protectors of sacred areas. According to their teachings, these beings live in the most remote sections of the mountain ranges, particularly in areas with limited water where few people venture, and they don't welcome humans in certain territories. I continue long-distance backpacking because it is my passion and profession, but I won't attempt the Arizona Trail again, specifically the Mazatzal Wilderness section. And I am more cautious now on all remote trails. When wildlife goes silent in ways that feel wrong, when I find tracks I can't identify, when I hear something following me that stays just out of sight, I trust those instincts and I leave that area, even if it means ending a major hiking goal. The Mazatzal Wilderness contains over 250,000 acres of rugged mountains, with very limited trail access and almost no human presence outside a few popular routes. Perfect habitat for something that wants to avoid people. And based on those tracks I photographed, and the 5 hours of being followed through difficult terrain, something does live in the remote sections of those mountains. Something large enough and intelligent enough to track a human through forest at hiking speed. And something that made it very clear through intimidation that I wasn't welcome in that wilderness.